If you have not seen the previous video in this series, go check it out, link is in the description. I talk generally about the details of the musical at the beginning of that one, so this video is being made with the assumption that you are familiar with the musical already.
Look at how they crawl around upon the ground like little ants.
Yes, but how they fascinate, confusing fate with what is merely chance.
Our second song in the concept album is sung from the perspectives of our two death gods, Ryuk and Rim, both discussing human actions with the in-universe knowledge that there is no god guiding their actions or delivering judgment.
Isn't it a laugh?
Isn't it a shame?
Thinking there is someone in heaven to blame.
Both follow the nihilistic outlook of humans being doomed to the status quo of hierarchy and infighting for eternity. Ryuk's character in the musical specifically seems to lean toward a more chaotic neutral stance that borders on jealousy at times, which creates a really interesting take on the character we'll talk about a bit later. Rim, on the other hand, naturally takes up the more curious and respecting stance. She may not understand humans or understand morality, but she finds the human obsession with it impressive, to say the least.
Living every day, till the day they die, never getting answers.
Yet still asking why, going through the motions as if there will be a reward.
While we stay eternally bored, they're only human. They don't see who they are is who they'll always be.
Now, it is important to note that while Ryuk and Rim only use the term humans, they are very clearly talking about the lower class specifically. After all, the upper class lives their lives in much the same way the death gods do.
They will pray, curse, live, die, never knowing that truth is another man's lie.
So the humans they think of as trapped and in the eternal cycle are the working class, the ones that are the most different to them, and the ones that amuse themselves as they try to fight against a system the death gods and the upper class see as no less than a fundamental law of the universe.
They're only human, standing still, doomed to live pushing boulders uphill. Only human.
Though it should be noted, they are not solely talking about the lower class that attempts to fight back. They are looking down upon the entire lower class as a whole. Quite literally.
Looking down from above, I'm intrigued by the light.
And again, this includes even the ones they would refer to as ignorant of the problems around them.
Going through the motions as if there will be a reward. Eat, sleep, love, hate, like a leaf blowing in the wind.
Watch them all vacillate.
It is also well worth noting how well the death god's inability to love plays into the idea that they represent the views of the upper class. It's a real sucker punch of a message. The upper class may be looking down, but it is with jealousy, both in Ryuk's whining about boredom and in Rim's curiosity. The main thing that defines them as humans, the main thing that defines them as beneath them, is the thing they have an inherent want for. Now, at the beginning of the video, we talked about Ryuk's hatred for humans in this version of the musical, but where does that hatred stem from? Some obviously stems from his jealousy, but that is not really hatred. He talks a big game about how pointless the actions are of the humans fighting back against the systems in place, but in the end, he is only hiding his boredom-induced anger. However, it seems to be the general inaction of humans that bothers Ryuk the most. Humans like Light's teacher. But remember folks, Ryuk is a villain. He always has been. Ryuk wants a world constantly at war. Almost like an edgy teen with a red cap calling for bombings, colonization, and even genocide. Ryuk is entertained by Light, but Ryuk does not support Light. This should be obvious, but I feel the need to mention it anyway. Ryuk being against the same people Light is against does not mean Ryuk is interested in a just world. Light's teacher is lower class. He is in the same boat as Light and his classmates. Yet, he goes as far as to defend the ones oppressing them. And with his job as a teacher, he will teach his nihilistic view, shared with Ryuk, to all his impressionable students. Ryuk would have a hatred for Light's teacher because he is making the world a boring place. Light has a hatred for his teacher because he is helping to keep the world's oppressive status quo. Two very similar, yet very different reasons. Now, let's go back to Rim. If Ryuk represents the views of a privileged, edgy teenager, what does Rim represent? Let's back up the song a bit to find out.
Isn't it a laugh?
Isn't it a shame?
thinking there is someone in heaven to blame.
Yes, but even while blaming fate for the lives that they lead, they hope for the lives that they need.
Personally, I would posit that Rim represents someone born into wealth who acknowledges their privilege and understands the plight of the poor, but at the same time someone who feels like they personally can't fight the system, and so they do nothing. The privileged liberal who understands there are legitimate problems the poor face, not just on the surface, but behind the scenes in the system, but they do not think it is enough of a problem to worry about. Much like Light's teacher.
Yes, but even while blaming fate for the lives that they lead, they hope for the lives that they need.
That last line holds so much subtle characterization for Rim and the group she represents. The people that hold these preconceived notions of how a marginalized group leads their lives and the expectations put upon them by the upper class. The ones that will see a story online of a student who raised enough money to pay off their debt, or someone in critical condition raising enough money to live, and have the audacity to post it online as uplifting news, or an example of the good the news doesn't show. Again, it's the ones who acknowledge the problems of the past are the problems of the present, and yet their only response is, man, that sucks, sad face, time to vote for the same party that's been fucking them over for decades, because this time it'll be different. And so we end off They're Only Human, with Ryuk dropping the death note to the world below, and with it, he says this line.
So let's call. Let's call.
He calls the humans bluff. Or rather, he calls the straw man bluff constructed by Ryuk and Rim themselves? But whatever, we'll go with it. Essentially, if given the power of a death god, would it still be in their human nature to vacillate, to do nothing with the power and stay fatalistic, stay in defense of the system, stay too afraid to take action? Or would they use that power to actually push the boulder up the hill, or even down the other side? Well, we get our answer very immediately when Light finds the death note, tests it on a criminal using children as hostages, and upon realizing it's real, we launch into our next song, Hurricane. And buckle in, cause this is gonna be a wild one. First, I said I wouldn't be bringing up the differences between the Japanese and the English, but I absolutely have to mention that while in the Japanese version of the musical, Light was his usual self from the source material, doubting the Death Note's legitimacy, but still trying it out. However, in the English version, Light feels he must attempt to use it. It is his responsibility. Even before knowing if it works, he says in the original English lyrics for an interlude song coming before Hurricane, the following song, Hurricane, is sung from Light's perspective as he revels in his newfound power. Power to be able to rid anyone from the world by writing their name in a book. Hey, wait a second. That sounds like cancel culture.
Did I hear correctly? Did it really happen? Was it simply done by writing down his name? Killing indirectly, pen and ink and paper. Writing is the gun, I only have to aim.
But hold up, we're all adults here, we all have brains. We all know that cancel culture isn't a thing, right? You do know that, right? Let me clarify what I mean. No person has had their career ended because of public outcry. There are some you can mention that have had their careers ended and canceled by the government and religious figures. That is true. But, and I use this word with complete sincerity, literally every celebrity accused of being canceled is still making entertainment. And I do urge anyone that feels they are able to find someone who has had their career canceled, not by the government or a religious figure, but by public outcry. Now, I am not defending when someone who is not a celebrity has their life ruined by a bunch of anonymous people online, usually due to outright racism. That is of course an issue in and of itself, but that is not what anyone cries as cancel culture. Now, additionally, if your idea of cancel culture is facing any amount of consequences for your actions whatsoever, well, that's pretty stupid. But stupidity aside, people losing their job over remarks is the invisible hand of the free market. Or, well, it would be if it was permanent, but when they get a new job 5 months later, it's not really canceling, is it? But you see my initial point. If these people who were truly being canceled were canceled, that's just capitalism doing its job. But again, that's not what's happening, so you can't use that as an excuse anyway. So why does this idea of cancel culture exist when there is no evidence of it existing at all? It's the wealthy. Celebrities and comedians lashing out at any criticism, trying to label it as a movement, despite firings over past remarks being a thing since forever. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for comedians being able to make whatever joke they want, just as they should be ready to face the consequences for making ones that people don't like. Perhaps when crowds don't laugh at your jokes, it's not because they're afraid to laugh, but because the joke isn't funny. Perhaps when you're fired over racist remarks, you shouldn't have been racist. Or actually, maybe just apologize? Have you ever noticed that all the people that were in danger of losing their show, but did not, were the ones that recognized their mistakes and apologized for their behavior? So hopefully we're all on the same page here. Cancel culture isn't a thing. But what if it was? What if there was a book, and in that book, any name you wrote down would die? And what if there was a site, and on that site you could submit the name and its sins? What if cancel culture was real, and was fatal?
Killing indirectly, pen and ink and paper. Writing is the gun I only have to aim. Could this be the hour? Unimagined power waiting to devour who I say. The hardest rains, the coldest winds are waiting for the hurricane. The human stains and all their sins blown away. The earth will shake, the sky will scream once they feel the power of the hurricane.
Now, I want to make it clear, I don't think anyone should be killed for a couple racist tweets. And in real life, I don't think anyone should have their lives ruined over something like that either. But right, that's never happened, so I don't have to worry about that. That's not a thing. And speaking of the rich, let's quickly switch tracks. Kinda weird, I know, switching tracks in the middle of this song, but the next song, Kira, tackles the same concept from Ryuk's perspective, so let's jump into that first. And of course, when I say Ryuk, you know I mean the rich.
Where I come from is a world of bone and dust. No need to change or readjust. Where the plight of human beings is ignored, and all I am is always bored. Except for Kira, Kira, your brand new name, the masses cheering. Kira, don't know he's Light Yagami, playing his dangerous game.
The last line there is key. Ryuk is hypocritical. Even in the main series he is, as is Rim very obviously with the love subplot. Ryuk and Rim are interesting characters because of their hypocrisy, and the difference in Rim acknowledging hers while Ryuk rejects his. And so, again, here in that last line, Ryuk contradicts himself. He tells Light, truthfully, that it was a random chance he was the one to pick up the Death Note. And yet, in this line...
Don't know he's Light Yagami, playing his dangerous game.
Ryuk insinuates the masses knowing the specific person they dubbed Kira would give them shock. But why? Light's motives align with theirs. The ones who would find faults in Light's role are the ones from which the song's perspective is sung, the famous and the wealthy.
Humans are such funny creatures, always thinking you're so smart. So we look down from our bleachers while you tear things apart.
And so, on the topic of Ryuk, let's bring it back to his strawman bet.
The more things change, they say that, the more they stay the same. You think you're making changes, but the only thing you can change is your name.
First off, what? Light didn't change his name, it was given to him. But that aside, we're back at the nihilistic view that even with Light's motives, even with the Death Note in hand, even with everyone on his side, Ryuk thinks he will ultimately make no change in the world. But isn't that only true because you kill him? Kind of breaking the rules of your bet there, Ryuk. But that's looking too far ahead. Let's stay focused and hop back on the previous song, Hurricane, once more.
I bring the pain, so be afraid. I will bring the power of the hurricane.
Now, it is important to note something here. This is a Death Note. This thing kills people. We're not talking about comedians here. When we pose the question, what if cancel culture was real and was fatal, we do not jump to, write down Joe Rogan. There are much, much bigger and more powerful fish to fry.
Finally a chance to find a little justice. There's nowhere to run to once the name is penned. Take what fortune grants you, use it while you've got it. Once you have begun, you ride it to the end. Elegant solution, flawless execution, righteous retribution on the way.
Because it's Kira, Kira, whose justice is right. Because it's Kira, Kira, who makes a list of people whose names he'll write down and, oh look now, there's an apple. Mind if I just take a bite?
It's almost like there's so little of a problem you can be distracted away from it. Or rather, it's almost like it's not a problem at all, because it factually isn't. And once again, we have Ryuk acting as if Light/Kira is the one making the decision on who to kill, rather than the site he's built for the masses to decide for themselves. Whether you agree with those actions or not does not factor into the previous statement.
I am the god of a brave new world, much better than the last.
True, this current god can suck a big old bag of dicks. And furthermore, if cancel culture were truly a problem, there would be no one to use the Death Note on. But boy howdy, are there plenty, and you already know how we feel about moral grayness.
The world's not black and white, the choice not either or.
Perhaps it's time we drain the color from it then, till we're back to seeing black and white and wrong and right again. I am the god of a brave new world, much better than the last. The top of talking is finally in the past.
Back to real life. Back to what this video's purpose was. Perhaps now the time for talking is indeed in the past. Not for some shitty comedians telling offensive jokes that will get rehired for eternity, but on a grander scale. On a scale where your voice can and must be heard. We're tying it back into the protests, baby. Now, don't get me wrong, we should absolutely still be holding these people accountable for their actions, even if in the end the consequences they face are minuscule. It is just as important to be advertising the movement as it is to be taking active steps in the movement. You have to remember that half of why a movement or event even exists is to raise awareness for the ignorant and be a constant reminder to the opposed. So do not let up. Continue to criticize, because that's what this is after all. Criticism culture, not cancel culture. So do both. Criticize the bigots online and punch the bigots offline. Make that voice heard.
We got the truth. They own the judges and we got the proof. We got hella people, they got helicopters, they got the bombs, and we got the guillotine.